If you don't...
Alright, this is my first video, and I'm going to do it on Jordan, What is the Truth, Peterson. Let's begin.
have anything to look up to. You don't have anything to do, right? A lot of the meaning that people find in their lives is purpose-driven.
I don't understand why you are so obsessed with trying to answer what is the meaning of life. A question that is subjective. There's no answer to this question, Peterson. It is entirely possible to just exist without meaning. I don't understand why this is so hard for some people to grasp. To an atheist, this argument holds no water. I believe that we exist. I don't need to know why we exist. The question itself has no bearing on how I live my life other than trying to suppress this irrational fear that I may exist for no reason.
And in order to put effort into something, to work towards something, you have to assume axiomatically that what you're working towards is better than what you have. Because why else would you do it?
So apparently, the motivation, or what drives us to continually advance, is to work towards something better than we already have. For conservatives, this proposes a fundamental problem within their ideology. Conservatism fights to keep the status quo and tradition. So then, according to Peterson, how do conservatives find meaning in life if they are not working towards something better? Ideologically, it cannot coincide with Peterson's view of a meaningful life. However, conservatives do harp a lot on personal development. This is where they advance in order to derive some meaning or purpose in life. But when all individuals advance, then according to them, society will also advance. But how can that be if you're fighting to keep the status quo or tradition?
If your life is deprived of meaning, then what you're left with is the suffering. It's not neutral, right? It's negative. So now the problem with having to aim up is that that produces a hierarchy, right? Because if you posit an aim, then everyone arrays themselves along a hierarchy of better at it to worse at it, right? And it doesn't matter. Like if you create basketball as a game, 100 years later you create people who are hyper specialized at basketball and they're great at it, and virtually everyone else is bad. So it doesn't matter. As soon as you produce a value proposition, you produce a hierarchy. The problem with a hierarchy is it produces inequality. The problem with inequality is it produces resentment. Right, but you can't get rid of the damn hierarchy because they produce inequality and resentment, because then you don't have anywhere to go. So that's not an answer.
So I've heard this from many on the right before. Many of them feel that people who fight against inequality are just jealous that they themselves are not in that position. No. For example, let's go back to the parent-child relationship. The parent is the top of the hierarchy. In children, does this initially produce resentment because of the inequality? No. Any resentment from the structure comes from the ignorance of the child and not the inequality of power. Inequality doesn't produce resentment for the sake of resentment. It creates the need for justice. People wouldn't feel resentment if they knew the equality was just. Do employees feel resentment for their managers if their managers are great at their jobs? Do they feel resentment when people are rewarded justly for their actions? No, because we all want the same kind of standing and respect if we were ever to get to that point in our lives. Do people on the left resent the wealthy for being wealthy? No. If they gain their wealth like everyone else, then there's no justification to be upset. It's when they lie, cheat, and take over the political system with their wealth that we have problems with. It's when someone acts unjustly and is rewarded for that action that we have resentment for.
Okay, so let's say you're trying to deal with the fact that you have to put up with a hierarchy if you're going to have any values. Well, how do you escape from the resentment trap?
Also, this idea of hierarchies being the only reason why somebody would want to advance is ludicrous as well. Why the hell does everything have to exist in this realm of competition? What if you continually seek knowledge for the sake of knowledge? You're not trying to become the subject matter expert to establish your dominance or power. You're not trying to gain more monetary resource from it. You're just trying to quench your thirst for knowledge. There is no hierarchy here. The purpose is the end itself.
And the answer is you do an intelligent multi-dimensional analysis of your life. It's like by the time you're 30, I would say, you're a pretty singular person. You know, you're unique in particular. And your life has multiple dimensions, and you're more or less successful or not along many of those dimensions. But it's a completely ridiculous game to pick someone else arbitrarily who's doing much better than you on one of those dimensions, to assume that you're a failure because of that, or that the world is unfair because of that, without knowing in full detail all of the rest of the elements of their lives. I mean, look, we're absolutely awash in stories of unhappy celebrities.
As long as you make small steps to better your life fractionally, you're okay. So when someone inherits millions of dollars versus a person who grew up in poverty, as long as each person takes small steps towards bettering themselves, we shouldn't care about their individual outcomes. This is such an absurd idea, but then again, I personally am more concerned about making heaven here on earth. I want to make this world the best place possible for all individuals, not just myself. I don't live in this fantasy world where I'll be joining my loved ones after I die. This is the only life we have, and I am more worried about making that the best place ever.
Stories of unhappy celebrities, you know, mired in interminable divorces, or in affairs, or in addictions, and that's par for the course. It's not helpful.
I guess you're trying to make the point that wealth doesn't buy happiness, yet all the self-help books are filled with stories of personal anecdotes of people coming from nothing and making it big. These anecdotes that try to inject motivation into people, yet we should be more focused on how unhappy celebrities are because success doesn't bring happiness. Then why do we need hierarchies if it doesn't bring happiness? Celebrities have clearly climbed these hierarchies, so do we not want to reach the top, or do we need to stay at the bottom? Make up your mind, Peterson.
It's helpful to have a goal. It's necessary to have a hierarchy. It's not particularly useful to compare yourself to other people. But it is useful to compare yourself to yourself. That's the right baseline, right? That takes everything else into account. And it's really practically useful. And I've done this in my clinical practice very frequently. It's like, okay, let's take stock of where you are. Okay, and then let's hypothesize about where you would like to be. It's a complex conversation, right? Because we want to figure out what's not so good about your present situation, exactly, precisely, and then come up with a hypothesis about what your life would look like if it was better. And then we can work on incremental improvement.
Wait. So you're an individual, and you're not supposed to look towards others to get a better understanding of your place in life. How the hell can you take stock of something you don't know about? If you don't know what a good life is, and this is the only one you've ever seen and lived, how can you take stock of what is better? This goes into the idea, I can't remember the philosopher's name, but he talks about being in the state of nature, in which that's where there was equality, because the individual existed without having to compare himself to anybody. He didn't know he was fat. He didn't know he was slow. He didn't know he was short. He didn't know he was ugly. The individual had nothing to compare itself to. So when we entered the state, or when we created society, this is where social inequality started. Because then I realized that there's more attractive people than me. There's better people at this. There's stronger people. There's slower people than me. You get this idea of your character and who you are and how you fit as an individual.
An idea would be, there's some step you could take, that you would take, that would make today or tomorrow fractionally better than yesterday. Right, and then you can iterate that. And that's actually unbelievably powerful. You hit the effect of compounding interest, let's say, very, very rapidly if you do that. Yeah, well, so there's real utility in incremental progress. And you don't have to improve your life much in
Yeah, no shit, Peterson. Way to bring up something that should be common fucking sense. You're such a genius.
increments to start hitting the effect of compounding interest. You know, you make one thing slightly better, and that increases the probability that you'll make the next thing slightly better, as well as having its positive.
I don't know about that, because if I take a die and I roll a die and I get a 6, right? The next time I roll it, does that mean I have a lesser chance of getting a 6? Success doesn't really predict probability.
To look up to
Fuck that all up, man. Dang it.
as having its positive side effects. And so if you, even if you make small steps forward and you do that regularly, that can turn your life around very rapidly over like a 1 to 2 year period. I mean, that's a long time, 1 to 2 years, but it's not a lifetime. And it certainly beats the hell out of going downhill precipitously, which tends to be the alternative. So it's better, and it keeps you out of the resentment, you know. And it's also more realistic, because it's not like everyone else doesn't have their problems.
You know what's more realistic? That I would rather be crying in a Ferrari about my mom's illness or my cancer than not having health insurance. Simple. Anyways, thank you for listening to my first video. Hopefully you enjoyed it, and stay tuned because my next video will be about Tommy Lauren.